Okay. So I think we can head to a start. I mean, some people are still coming, but I think it's fine, and we want to stay on schedule for everyone. In particular, Laura is doing like the 3 marathon. She just have to jump to a front stage talk after her moderation here. So let's stay on track. I wanted to thank you all for coming in this little open source opening in Slush. It's very rare for us to organize an event, but we thought we had so many friends at Slush in the Hugging Face community, so many people we've been working with. It would be nice to gather some of them, have a set of exchange on stage, and also some demos. So basically, the afternoon or like the 2 hours we go as follow. We'll start with one panel with Jan and Robin. I'll be interviewing, I'll be moderating, and they're both very exceptional founders, creating a generational company from Germany, but that went definitely global. And then you'll have a panel with a lot of infra, interesting tools and startups and builders that I guess you all know, including Supabase, Chris, Snowflake, OpenAI, and NVIDIA on stage. So we'll brought a couple more chairs for this really great crowd. And we'll close the panel sessions with a research panel on investors. It's always interesting to like ask spicy questions to investors about open source and monetization, how it works, and if they think there's money to be made. So we'll try to trick them a little bit and see if they can answer these tricky questions later. So we'll have. For this one, we'll have Laura OpenAI moderating, then GC with Alex and Matt from Axel, and Gabe from A16Z actually has to jump on the plane right now. So yeah, we'll have to ask him questions maybe on the way to the airport, but I don't think it's going to work really. So we'll probably just have two of them on the stage. After that, we're actually also opening, so there's a couple of demos here. From our partners. There is our new robots that Steven can show you, and basically what we do in robotics and open source at Hugging Face. We're super lucky to have Versal. They were not supposed to come to Slush, as I understand, but we managed to convince them to come anyway. So we're super happy to have them around. And we have the Google team who is there, also making some demos. And we also plan to open the doors of the venue because there is a second nice open source side event happening just now from Avian. If you know Oskari, he's kind of a legend of Slush. He's building one of the most impactful startups in Helsinki. And so you can mingle with them. It's venue one, and basically have our networking, like discussion part of our side event at the same time. So feel free to walk from here to venue one and vice versa. It's the event for startup, the role of open source in production AI. So basically, we could have almost joined our events. This being said, I think it's enough for an introduction. I want to invite Robin and Jan to come on stage with me, and let's kick this started. How do you want to sit? Yeah, good question. Okay. I just take this to sit. On my. Thank you. Okay, just quick question. Lucille, my timer is for these things, right? It's 40 minutes. Okay, let's go quickly, 40 minutes. We'll speak in 2x, you know, like when you see the podcast really quickly, we'll try to speak like that.
It's my default.
So I'm super lucky to have you both on stage. I'll do a super brief, now we have 40 minutes. Okay, let's talk for 40 minutes. I think you both are amazing path in life, so I just want to quickly introduce you and your company, and then we can jump in some question. So Jan, you started with a VFX background, so maybe not an entrepreneur, I would guess, when you were you know, like starting your first career, and then you started in 2019 this crazy N8N path. And what I found super interesting is how you kind of had maybe two paths as I read N8N. This first path where you raise a couple of like seed and series A, right, building this automation tool. And then more recently, boom, this kind of huge acceleration and AI amplification, and then this beautiful like 2025 years. where N8N became also like synonymous with kind of AI automation, and you had these beautiful fundraise and climbing also on the open source, like passing my own library transformers on the number of GitHub stars, you know, like 150,000 for like something like that, which is like a huge visibility in the open source community. I think there is many things I want to ask you and talk to you about, including how you think about monetization. You were also before N8N famous for the Fair Code initiative and how maybe open source developer can actually monetize their code. So Robin, I think what is interesting is you were not also a born entrepreneur, coming from research, like doing PhD, like inventing many things like VQGAN, the latent diffusion we was talking on the stage yesterday, and then building this maybe unprepared, like huge community around stable diffusion, and deciding just 1 year ago. So I think you two paths are very different. Like N8N starting now 6 years ago, and Black Forest Lab starting just now, or maybe 2 years ago. You were saying that much more recently, deciding to join, to like leave stability, to bring force with some of your friends and build Black Forest Labs here in Europe. And I think maybe what I want to ask you both, and I can start with you, Robin, is how does it feel to build a global company from Germany?
No, I don't know. It's kind of, I never built like another company before, so I only have this one reference, right? But I think what we see is like just the insane adoption of the AI models, like stable diffusion that you mentioned, or latent diffusion before that. And when I actually started doing this and putting out like the first models of open source, and then realizing, oh wow, people across the world are using this and building crazy stuff on top of it. That's like a super nice feeling.
So would you say that, for instance, that having this open source community gave you kind of the strength or the courage to say, I don't really care where I'm going to build that from, and I'm just going to build it?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like the stuff has to be really good, or useful. And I guess useful also means, especially in open source and AI models, it has to like be deployable locally. You have to, I don't know, like fit it on like a consumer type hardware. But yeah, then it doesn't really matter from where you do that, and you can do it with like a relatively small team. Again, like the important part is that it's actually useful.
Yeah. So what about you, Jan? You might be the archetypical of the small team, because I think you built N8N alone at the first, right? Like single developer. And you probably also had this very strong pull from the US, right? I think I read you were invited to go to YC, I think like that, decided not to go. And so what gave you maybe the courage, or maybe the will to not go to the US and like?
I guess like for me it was always very important to build a European or German company. Like I applied for YC honestly not to get into YC. They had like this kind of I don't know, it was kind of a endowment or something, something similar. We can kind of win like 15K or something if you actually apply. And I really wanted money, and because I didn't have much, and actually there was no money at all. And so it was like a big amount of money for me. That's why I applied, and only if you apply you could win it. And then I actually won it, which was nice. But again, I didn't take it because I thought I knew YC is going to be amazing, but one of the requirements was actually to kind of incorporate in Delaware. And that's one of the things that always annoyed me the most, is like very many of them, like very many successful companies have been built by Europeans all in the US. And then everybody's always complaining about we don't have any proper European companies. And that's kind of obvious, like if they by default go over there, like it's never going to change ever. This is why it was very important for me to tell them, the investors, hey, I want to have a German GmbH. And they obviously didn't like it because it also causes a lot of friction and problems and makes it more expensive, many other things. But in the end, they understood why I wanted to do it, and they were supportive in the end. But it didn't make life easier. But I think for me, the important thing was to kind of prove that it can be done. Because everybody says, hey, you cannot be a successful big company in Europe. And the idea is, again, somebody has to prove that it's possible. And that was the idea. It took definitely longer, and we're still definitely not there yet. And I think there's definitely a few levels we still have to achieve to really prove that it's possible. But at least we're getting there slowly.
Did you had already a lot of traction in the community at that time, or did you feel like confident, in a way I can say no because I feel like I already have this almost product market fit?
I guess we had kind of community product market fit in the sense of that people really were using us. Nobody was paying us. Like, we also had nothing to sell. Like, we probably created the first paid features after 3-4 years. We really focused a very long time just to create a value for our users and make sure they're really getting value out and become successful. We had very early on like very strong GitHub star growth, and as stupid as it is, like that really matters also for investors because it's like one of the few things you can actually see and measure from the outside, very clear that there is something there, even though it's maybe a vanity metric, but I think it still shows something. And they have seen this very strong growth, and that's honestly plus the kind of the excitement of the community. They kind of really start to adopt it for all kind of things that kind of allowed us to kind of raise the seed round and then later also the Series A, because even at Series A stage we didn't have much revenues. Means like at seed stage I was sure we had kind of a product people liked, but it was definitely not this thing. It's like they really needed me or anything like that. It's like they could have very easily turned away as well. But I think luckily the world changed. I think like 10 years ago it would have been harder to kind of really get US investors invest in a European entity. And actually we had one investor like SV Angel that actually didn't invest in the end, because it was too complicated for them. I think it didn't turn out so well for them. In hindsight, I think they had like 250x return by now. So it would have been time well invested. But I think it also happens that some people did shy away from that.
Yeah, fully understand. As an angel who sometimes has to go to notaries only for German companies.
It's annoying, yeah.
Anyway, maybe discover the local notaries in my city. So I want to take you on the monetization, because I mean, prior to an A10, you had this like fur code idea that you were pushing a lot, and an A10 is also obviously monetizing differently. So the tricky take is, why didn't you drink your own Kool-Aid? Or like, what do you think maybe right now is maybe the right way to monetize open source projects?
First, I would probably not say they have to be open source, because open source, again, this OC term, which we try to avoid, is where we never say that we are open source, because they're very protective there. The nice thing is also that I hear that the OC is becoming more open. There's actually some efforts going on to kind of make something that's similar to what we define as fair code actually OC-approved open source. So it's actually quite nice to see that they also kind of realize that something has to change, that a lot of the value creation actually doesn't go back in an organization that supports the project, rather it goes to other organizations. So I think we took the right approach. I think it makes stuff also not easier. The same thing like staying in Germany definitely didn't make it easier, but I thought it was the wrong term, the right thing, for the simple reason, because I realized very early on, okay, there is a problem. I also realized that a lot of companies changed the license, and especially that people were very angry when these companies changed the license, rightfully so, because they said they changed the rules. But the people were always just angry because they changed the rules, not because of the license people chose normally. And so the problem was the change itself. So that's why it was important for me to be very upfront and honest about it very early on, saying, hey, I want to monetize the product. I think the value should go to the company because you want to support the product. That's why I think this kind of fair code approach is actually the right one.
So I think that there is a tension always in this open source, which is kind of fundamental in my opinion, is you want to build a community, you want to find a business model, and it's hard to not, in a way, lose the community if you try to monetize too strongly in some aspects. Robin, I think you have a mixed relation with building communities and thinking. Like maybe because Stable Diffusion was this huge explosion where basically everyone discovered, like 1 million people that were not just AI specialists, but everyone started to use the product for everything. But you still decided to keep pushing your models in the open after that, and basically let people build interesting, extension and things on top. What's your view right now, or what is maybe some of the most interesting application or extension you've seen people building on top of Flux? You have some interesting examples.
I think there's like different levels or different communities actually that you're serving as like open source AI models. One that I find extremely interesting is obviously just like research community, and you see like the value of having like a powerful base model that can be tuned, that actually like, I know there's so many papers that explore something like Stable Diffusion or Flux, and just look at its architecture and try to understand the model better, and I find that like highly interesting. But then also like others that turn the base model into like a more specific kind of application for whatever, like like there were very early attempts that took the text-to-image model, Stable Diffusion, and turned it into an image editing model, which we then also can use in our own research and in our own development and get some of that back in. And I think that's like one of the beauties of like open source communities. But then yeah, like all the other craziness that's happening, and people actually building like real companies and real products on top of like on top of these models in a very creative ways. It's really cool to see.
Are you guys sometimes reabsorbing some of the things that community have extended on your models as terms of like internal development? Do you feel like there is dogfooding? Yeah.
100%. I mean, this happens on like multiple different levels, right? Like you have like open source frameworks like PyTorch, which are developed in the community, and I mean, we're also building on PyTorch, so that's like the low level, I would say. But then on the modeling itself, sometimes we actually see something really nice, and then we take it back into also some of our like more like commercial offerings. But I think that's like one of the beauties of like having like this mixed approach.
And maybe another thing I'm always wondering, I think I would love to get your take, is I think this framework, and you tried maybe something very impressive in that you tried to solve the problem that many people have been trying to solve, which is defining the right balance between automation and kind of finding a way to do simply very complex tasks, and still the other extreme, which is still leaving a lot of control to your user, basically. And that's always super tricky in an open source framework. And I feel like to be able to succeed in that, you need to have this extremely strong personality or product vision when you build your product. And sometimes people think that when they will build something like open source spirit, basically they will wait for the community to bring all the ideas. So what's your take maybe on how to build this type of project? Like,
in the end, I think like what helped me is like just building a product for myself. Like I thought it should exist. I really wanted to use it. So I just built the stuff I thought they were going to be helpful and cool, to be honest. And luckily, I'm probably not very similar to most people for a lot of different reasons. But I think in this sense, I'm a developer. There are a lot of developers out there that look for very similar things like myself. So I think I just try to build something that's valuable for people, for developers like myself, for quite technical people, and I think it worked out there. I think it's always sad to hear when people start a startup because they think there's a gap in the market or something they heard somebody needs. I think this can just fail. Like you have to be the first power user that really needs a product, else you're gonna be successful.
Build a product for yourself. So let's close with you, Robin. Are you building Black Forest for yourself, or maybe which type of AI would you like to build for yourself in the future?
One that does, I don't know, like meetings for me and emails and stuff like this.
Buy that one.
Fireside chats. No, that's actually nice. I'm like, I don't know, like I think at Black Forest Labs we want to push more into, it's a really hot topic, but we're doing this from like, it's very deep in our like development roadmaps into like what you call world models and like interactive models with like a long memory context. And I'm sure there will be like applications built on top of this stuff that you can't even really imagine today, because you can think about models that you will be able to kind of like talk to, and it will react with like visual output, or vice versa. You can give visual input, and then it will react in audio, and all of that in real time and extremely high quality. I think there's like a lot of nice stuff that's going to happen.
I would love that. I hate reading what ChatGPT is writing when you write 10 pages.
Exactly,
so if you can generate.
No, visual is like, it's also like, it's such an information-rich medium.
Thanks everyone. Let's move to the second panel. We quickly bring.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, that was loud. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Tom, Robin, and everyone for the brilliant panel. We've got a star-studded lineup now to chat about open infra, tooling, and developer ecosystem, and how it's evolving in the in 2025 and also in 2026 and going forward. The way this is going to run is I'm going to ask all the panelists a few questions. We'll start off by asking them to introduce themselves and to talk about what are they quite excited about in this particular year with respect to what their companies or they have shipped and so on. And we're then going to head into some Q&A, and then we'll end the panel with some of the bets that they have for 2026. Perfect. So just to get started, in this year, in 2025, we went from democratizing access to models which are far exceedingly capable from what they were last year, and we were in this agentic era wherein you can go from an idea to an app in less than a day. And in fact, you can scale it using some of the services that all of you provide in matter of minutes, right? And I feel like we should take a step back and we should unpack what is powering all of this. So maybe we can just go popcorn style. Maybe you can introduce yourself, some of the things that you are quite proud of. Which startups, developers, and so on are using currently, and yeah, let's talk about that. Maybe Niels, you can set us up.
Yeah. Hi, Niels Teckers. I'm a solution engineer in the Snowflake startup team. So I help startups to build with Snowflake. And the interesting thing, one of the feedback that I got when we shared that we're going to be on this panel is people saying, well, Snowflake, that's not an open source solution, it's a walled garden. And that's sort of what we hear a lot, which is actually not true. So that's why I'm really excited to talk about that. And obviously, AI is the big theme, everybody's talking about it. But Snowflake is a data or AI data platform. So as much as we did a lot of releases this year around supporting Gen AI, having all the models supporting in the platform, one of the major developments, I think, and what we say is that there's no AI strategy without a data strategy, is the way we can work with data, not only in the closed garden scenario that people sort of think about Snowflake, but how do we work with open data, open standards. So one of the big things that we released is the support of Apache Iceberg as a native open source table format that we fully support. So that means that you, as a developer or as a customer, you can choose whether or not you use the native proprietary data format or you use an open data format like Iceberg. So that gives a lot of options. A lot of larger customers use that. For example, Booking, I'm based in Amsterdam, so Booking.com is in Amsterdam. It's one of the largest Snowflake customers. They moved from Hadoop to Iceberg. And they were using Snowflake for a long time, but they wanted to have that open data format. And once Iceberg was really mature, with a lot of support from Snowflake in the open source community, they made that move from Hadoop to Iceberg. The other thing, it's important to have the interoperability in the open is to have an open catalog. So that's why Snowflake developed that, released it to Apache, and that's the Apache Polaris catalog, which is an open catalog where you can interact with all these open data formats. So yeah, for me, that's really important. It gives options and flexibility to builders. But the other aspect of how do you get data into a platform is ingestion. So there are a lot of partners of Snowflake that provide all these tools to connect and to move data into Snowflake. And one of the startups I was working with last year was a startup called Datafolo. And the founders of that startup were the original authors of Apache NiFi. And at some point, they didn't respond to our Slacks and emails anymore. And we thought, oh, what's happening? And 3 weeks later, it was announced that Snowflake acquired Dataphoto with the strategy to have a managed Apache NiFi solution in Snowflake, but leveraging the whole open source concepts of Apache NiFi. So giving you, as a developer, as an enterprise, the option to leverage hundreds of open source connectors, but also have the option to run it in a managed way in Snowflake. So I think from a data foundation perspective, that's what I'm really cool.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Maybe let's head over to Wolfie from OpenAI.
Yeah, lovely to see everyone. My name is Wolfie, and I lead the technical side of the OpenAI startups team. And what that means is we work with startups all around the world and get really hands-on on a technical basis. So it can be anything from helping set up evals, fine-tuning models, optimizing architectures, prompts, that kind of stuff. And it really means we get to see what's built on the frontier, because people are doing some crazy stuff and really kind of pushing the frontier of what our models can do, but also what they can't do yet. And so we get to see that. And it's been a pretty amazing year for releases, especially on the open source side for OpenAI. I was reflecting on kind of the biggest pieces, and it felt like the week where we had number one, the GPT OSS release, which they decided to do at the same time as the GPT-5 release, just in case we're getting too much sleep, was a super, super important week for it. But we've also had the Codex kind of CLI developed. We've got ACP and apps coming out as well. So there's like a lot of progress there. I think for me, one of the releases that has gone slightly under the radar, but I think is really, really cool, was the GPT OSS Safeguard release recently. And so for people that don't know, that's where we released a fine-tuned version of GPT OSS, really focused on safety. And the reason that's powerful is because they're reasoning models. And so typically when you have safety classifiers, you take your classifier, you fine-tune it, you train it on a bunch of data, and it works really, really well until you decide that you want to change your mind on what your policy is. And then you have to go and you have to retrain the entire model. But with these classifiers, they operate at inference time. You put in your safety policy, and actually then it can adjust its reasoning. You just change a few things in the prompt, and you can examine its chain of thought to see, is it reasoning the way I want it to, and therefore have safety built into your products. And so for me, the combination of like our GPT-5, 5.1 models, our open source models, and then the safeguard just means you have this complete stack of whether you want frontier kind of intelligence, you want on-prem deployments, or you want your kind of own custom safety safeguards. You can do all of that. So to me, those are some of the most exciting developments.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I totally forgot about GPT-OSS safeguard. Thanks for that. So we just spoke about enterprise data. We spoke about model, agentic side of things, Codex, and so on. Let's head over to the talk of the town, NVIDIA. Ziv.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. I'm Ziv. I'm part of the Supabase startup team. It's a technical team that also works, like Wolfie here, with the frontier model builders, companies like OpenAI, Black Forest Labs from the panel before. And the idea is to help them better use our products. I think what people, kind of a misconception where there's a lot of things NVIDIA is doing beyond accelerated computing, especially in the open source. We have a lot of engineers, developers, software, and however that work on adopting a lot more open source solutions. Nemotron is one of them. It's a family of models, but not just models, also recipes, data sets that are available in Hugging Face, which you can download, train, fine-tune, optimize it with your data sets. It's something that we see quite often, enterprises that maybe started with a POC on something that is more general, and then they want to, when they deploy in real time, in real world scenarios, there are some issues, okay? Something is not as accurate as expected. So to do that, we see a lot more domain-specific models coming, using your data on your premise, on your cloud, using the tools, the open source tools that we make available for everyone. So Nemotron is one example, but beyond that, we have also Groot for robotics that we collaborate quite closely with Hugging Face. We have Cosmos for physical AI, okay, world models, but it's not just the models themselves, it's the entire stack, all the way from synthetic data generation, simulations, the training, the inference. So everything we do in these domains is fully open source, again, making it available for developers and startups like yourself to adopt, to customize, and maybe to build on top your products.
Love it. So now we've gone around the horn. Let's go to Supabase and talk about how developers are using it to build apps and scale it to production and so on. Chris. I think you're.
I can just talk louder. Thanks. Cheers. Do you want this one that doesn't work? Could someone turn that on for me? That's why I don't work in hardware. I'm one of the solution architects, one of the many solution architects at Supabase. I'm just a glorified DBA for 4 million developers, I guess. Yeah, it's hard to say what's good about what we shipped, so maybe just go to our changelog, probably. But I think most of the focus has been on this data platform, but this, I don't know, access to Supabase, I suppose, that people are running it self-hosted. People are integrating with it in their AI builder platforms like Lovable, Bolt, etc. Or people are working with it in their IDE. So different ways to run, like use the MCP with Supabase. It works locally in the CLI. We've got a hosted version for people. Yeah, wrappers inside the database to connect to external systems, different databases. We also have the Iceberg format supported as well. And yeah, we can get to some of that stuff in later questions.
Brilliant. So now we've got like a good understanding of like what each of the companies have done and how potentially like startups could use them. Let's maybe dig deeper. So I'm gonna just like pick you randomly and just like ask some questions, right? So maybe starting with Ziv, you mentioned about Cosmos, you mentioned about Nemotron, and of course like you are by all means kind of defining the market right now with the chips, with the inference, with your libraries, all the way down from CUDA layer, all the way to model layer and so on. What kind of trends are you seeing within the market, not just in Europe, across the globe? Like what is it? What are you seeing like people use, and how does it play with respect to your overall strategy?
Good question, because there are so many trends out there. And of course, NVIDIA spreads across a lot of different domains, all the way from, again, automotive to healthcare, financial services, etc. I think what we start to see more and more, agentic obviously is something that people quite often use. And with the proliferation of very capable models, obviously it makes a lot of the use cases much more capable or achievable. I think what we want to double down on, of course, through these trends that we see is that what we try to educate a lot of the communities out there and startups is to start with something that is quite boring, but evaluation, to understand, okay, you are trying to solve a very big problem, try to understand how you plan to define success in a quantitative way, because then you can plug in, I don't know, models from OpenAI, Nemotron, Google, whatever. There's a lot of models out there. And for you to understand if these trends that you keep hearing are achievable, you need to be able to measure them. So this is applicable to every domain. Physical AI, as I mentioned, is something that we see getting much more mature. Maybe in other regions, not necessarily in Europe, but Europe are trying to keep up the pace. That can also be for consumers, but also for, again, more kind of industrial use cases. And on the other hand, of course, agentic for the more of the B2B, B2C use cases. I think this is also something that maturity is coming. Like we know adoption is very early. There's a lot of POCs. Moving from POCs to something that is actually scalable is not an easy task to do, and we try to help with our tooling and blueprints and our stack to help them get there. But we do see the motivation, people not using AI just as a hype anymore, but something that will start to be plugged into a lot of work streams, workloads all over the globe.
Thanks. Maybe moving more up the stack with the API and sort of like agentic layer. Wolfie, OpenAI has been on a tear, right? Like in this year, they released you released Apps SDK. You released you're essentially sort of productionizing ChatGPT itself for developers to essentially open up their products to all of 800 million active users, right? And of course, then there's the agentic commerce protocol and so on and so forth. I know this is still like early days, but how are you? What kind of sort of adoption do you foresee for these kind of sort of like emerging use cases right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already seen some pretty amazing shifts in user behavior, right? Like if you think a year ago where people went for their information, now they come to ChatGPT and they ask questions to it, they get results back. We're starting to see that kind of move into actions as well, obviously with various sorts of connectors, MCP, etc. Really, ACP, so the Agentic Commerce Protocol, and apps in ChatGPT are kind of shifting that even further, where you can do more things with ChatGPT. And to me, that's super exciting because like our entire aim is just to make it as useful as possible. And that sounds trite, but it genuinely is. And so with something like ACP, which is open, people can develop once and have a bunch of integrations that just work. And so we're seeing this with partners like Shopify, where now you can go in ChatGPT and you can ask for a product and it can go and look for you. And it can know you and it can know what you like. And that is really powerful because you get the kind of benefits of personalization and the benefits of actually kind of reaching a bunch of users if you're a startup, for example. And just like providing value in a way that's actually kind of tailored to them. And that to me is really, really exciting. I think the kind of next wave of this really is, right now we've launched apps with a kind of limited number of partners. And I really hope to see and think it will like proliferate from there. If there's anything you want to do, we can, number one, obviously, for the startups, reach 800 million people weekly. And that is incredible in terms of access. And so if you're a startup who's building something super powerful, but maybe actually like it's hard to get that distribution, if you're adding value to people on ChatGPT, there's every incentive for the agent behind ChatGPT to actually surface your product and really bring it to people because you're adding value not only to the users but also to the startup. And so I really see this as like a two-way partnership where we're figuring out exactly how it should best work, but the kinds of things that already I've seen in development and can't go into too much here are pretty amazing of what people will be achieving, both in terms of the startups themselves, but also the people who are kind of using ChatGPT to achieve a bunch of different things.
Amazing. I'm personally quite excited about how developers use it and what kind of use cases come up in the coming times. So speaking of developers, maybe heading over to Chris. There's a lot of integrations with Supabase. Like you can build a Vercel app connected to Supabase. You can you've recently released like an MCP server which allows people to interact with the database itself and so on. So maybe from your point of view, what kind of trends are you seeing with developers or startups building on your platform itself, and what kind of advice do you have for them?
Definitely a mix. I think one thing I noticed when I started at Supabase was like this kind of integration API was just in the docs. There was no like contact us form or like request access. So most of the time we were a little bit like on the back foot. When like Lovable launched, they were like, by the way, we've integrated with you and we've got like, 40,000 users and we're probably going to have 500,000 soon. Should we have a chat? And we're like, probably, yeah, that would be a really good idea. Let's form a partnership and actually like optimize how we can use the platform. And we're like, we can plan these features together. But those tools, a lot of these tools here kind of unlock things that were maybe available but harder to access for those that aren't technical in technical roles, have technical backgrounds, etc. So that also means we have a bunch of people that are maybe opening support tickets like, what is Supabase? Like, why does my website keep making calls to it and kind of thing? Or like from the other end of like, I made this over the weekend and now I need to like handle payments and how am I going to do that kind of thing? So the ownership of where those problems are, who handles them, who helps with them. This has also helped define that as we've worked on partnerships with other companies. The MCP servers helped like bringing in information from docs, surfacing it from GitHub, which has helped, again, the power of open source. Postgres documentation is 40, 50 years old. So it's very easy for our kind of AI assistant to be like, well, this is probably part of the issue. Like, we can help you surface this, and that helps with our docs also then being in the open as well to kind of really fine tune that.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe let's head over to Niels. I mean, data is very important, right, for any enterprise, and I feel like Snowflake is kind of been like there around when it comes to all sorts of like data management, especially around enterprises with petabytes and petabytes of data, and as we sort of unlock a lot of these like agent-based applications, of course there is the need to sort of access this data more sort of easily, right? And not just for humans, but also for agents, right? So maybe in your words, like how are you seeing this evolve in this year and in the time to come, and so on?
Yeah, obviously integrating data with AI and ML is really one of the key sort of aspects of Snowflake. Just today we announced the partnership with Hugging Face, where we now really easily can pull any model from Hugging Face and having it sitting in Snowflake. So the ability for developers to build applications inside Snowflake with container support, with the LLM, what we call Cortex support, that's really strong. But the move to agentic, we see that with both our enterprise customers, but also the developers and the builders that I work with, that they want to leverage these capabilities, not from a sort of a pure platform perspective, but just use these functionalities really easy, integrated into their workflows, in their way of working, in their applications. So from an open perspective, enabling builders to use everything they're used to do, so full Git integration, VS Code integration, all these things to make it easy to work with it, and also enable developers to have a usage of all these capabilities in a very easy way. So, yeah.
Lovely. We're a bit short on time now, so I'm gonna like put you all on spot, and we're just gonna go around the horn and. We're going to ask everyone what are their bets for 2026, and we've been lucky to have like everyone right down from like infra layer to the model layer to data layer to developer platforms. So I'm quite excited to see like what the joint sort of bets look like. So maybe we can kick it off from Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, I think partnership between like users and AI definitely for sure. Like people without the technical background. Seeing there's a problem and kind of actively troubleshooting with it or working on solutions so that they kind of learn the technical side without having to like do a boot camp or like have that undergraduate degree for sure. And the platform focus, I think, of enabling Postgres, Supabase, et cetera, to like scale out, integrate with other platforms. Definitely that's what's coming, I think.
Yeah, I think we'll see the two trends even extending, like having more capable general purpose agentic tool calling, function calling, all of that models from, of course, the big AI labs, and on the other hand, more domain-specific ones. AI natives would build domain-specific products. I think we've seen a few of them here in the conference, but beyond that, also not very technical enterprises, startups being able to use this with their data for their problems. So doubling down on that.
Yeah, I think a lot, and we talk a lot about kind of whether you can have a sustained advantage in startups at the moment because things move so fast. And I think when I think about next year, one of the trends I'm really excited for is this kind of increased specialization and using every piece that's available to kind of win, stay ahead of your competition. And so one of the trends that we see, both in terms of open source models, but also actually our own kind of GPT-5, et cetera, is the top startups fine-tuning a lot. And you really kind of make the most of everything that's out there. Use state-of-the-art intelligence where it makes sense. If you need to deploy on-prem, go open source, use the amazing models for that. When you're using our models, in certain cases, we have companies who fine-tune, actually OpenAI models and host them with us. And that's how they stay ahead of their competition. And then they go on-prem and they fine-tune open source models. And so really kind of using every piece that's available across the stack of open source and other models as well, I think is the way that you kind of stay ahead of people in such a competitive position. I think we'll see that continue into 2026.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and align with Chris a little bit, the unification of all these different data patterns like analytical, transactional, real-time data. What we see and what we're working on is unifying all that different data so that you have a single data source for AI, ML, and all these great applications that our partners and startups built. So Postgres in Snowflake is something that we just launched, and that's going to develop further with a very tight integration into the other data formats. So that's definitely, from a data perspective, what I see happening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your point of views, for sharing what you're excited about. I'm personally really excited about 2026 and how things go from here till wherever we go. Thank you so much.
I am not one of these guys on screen. First of all, this is obviously going to be the best panel because these are super cool investors that I very much love working with. Why don't we start with a couple of intros, and then you tell us what you've invested in recently in open source or that uses open source.
Sure. OK, it's working. Hey, everyone. I'm Alex McKenzie. I'm a partner at General Catalyst here on our seed fund. And maybe more relevant for this panel, I've been a software engineer all my life, and so a huge beneficiary of open source. I don't know if this was covered already, but it's kind of cool to be doing this panel here in Helsinki because it's the home of Git, it's the home of Linux, it's the home of MySQL, like seminal open source projects that we all either know we use or indirectly use. On the open source side, firstly, GC has been very active in open source for a pretty long time. There's GitLab. Of course, there's Robin and the team at Black Forest, Mistral, Neon. Personally, I think my most recent open source investment was in a company called Phlox. I don't know how many people know of Nix and that whole open source world. Nix is many things. It's a OS, it's a package manager, it's a build system, but it was started 20 years ago, 2003. Is now the 6th most contributed open source project ever. It's either one rung or below Next.js. So that was the personal investment. Phlox is the company that's actually bringing Nix to the masses, much like Docker did for containers. Sorry, I'm really getting in the weeds here. And then outside of direct investing, what we do a lot at GC is actually sponsor and back open source projects. So the most recent of those was a project called Zig. If anyone writes any Zig code, there we go. Thank you, Thomas. So that's our most recent sponsorship. We're always looking for other open source projects that we think great businesses can get built on top of. So I will approach some of you later, not just Thomas, and look for recommendations. And I also wrote about Zig, if you're curious. Irish people struggle to self-promote. I'm going to be the one Irish person that does it. My blog is mac.work/blog/Zig, if you want to read up. And yeah, nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Matt, I'm a partner at Accel. Previously was a founder. The biggest thing I built was an online payments company called GoCardless. And then similarly, Accel invested in lots of great businesses in open source. Recently, Polar's data framing infrastructure business we're very excited about. And then also, I think an interesting topic, maybe today or maybe another day, is around like how strictly you want to define open source. If you're taking OSI definition or something else, but I've been angel in Buddybase, N8N, and a variety of other businesses that have kind of started or continue to be open source in some form or another.
Well, I'll tell you what, I had some questions, but why don't we actually go through that? how do you strictly define open source here?
I think it's fuzzy, for sure. I guess more so my framing is in terms of what should be open source, what should be free. There's a spectrum of what open source really means, versus what should actually become something that you manage or pay for. And the framework I've always had is be as individually useful as possible. So for me as a developer, I've had the privilege of using many open source projects in my time that have been individually useful, but then from a point of view of when you should actually start to manage or monetize them, I think it's when I tap my shoulder or my colleague's shoulder on a Monday morning and say, hey, have you heard about this thing called Nix? And they say, typically no. And then I try pull them in, try actually get them to collaborate with me. We all of a sudden realize there is no managed version, there is no GUI that allows us to work together. And then that's where the monetization starts to present itself. But maybe to be more direct on the question, again, I think, well, I'm hogging the mic, maybe I'll pass on.
You brought it up, so.
So I think for me, on slightly differently, I think we shouldn't be kind of dogmatic or religious about these matters. And it's more about what are you trying to achieve? We want to bring amazing tools and technology, get them into people's hands and enable them to build stuff. In order to do that, you need a functioning, sustainable entity that can run and work on an ongoing basis. And therefore, the bit that I find more interesting is like what should be open, what should be closed, which I go on to. And then I think secondly, there's a culture thing of like, nobody likes the bait and switch. So I think when you're building the business from the get-go, you should have a vision and an image of how it's going to evolve over time and try and stay true to those values. No one gets more upset than when a project suddenly changes those values halfway along and you've gone and invested and contributed a ton into that particular project. And then the way I think about what should be open, what should be closed, from your definition, actually, I think it's a good one. So we do that, and then to be additive instead of just repeating the same things. I think you came at it from the user's perspective. If you come at it from the kind of organization building the software, I think stuff that helps spread adoption should be open. Stuff that gets tools into people's hands should be adoption, and then stuff that people are willing to pay more or increases the number of dollars they're willing to pay for, that's the stuff that should be proprietary.
So for the founders in the room, are you comfortable or do you think you should be investing in companies that are a hybrid between open source, closed source, or do you think that there are business models that benefit from being only one or the other, and if you want to expand on that?
I'll take the question, good PR training. I'll answer the question I wish I was asked.
It's a platform for you to answer the question you want to answer.
I'll often hear many open source pitches, and I'll then really try to drill down with the founder on why they've gone down the open source route. And whenever someone says the blanket set of traits, it's not that it's not true, but that it's great for distribution, it's good for code auditability, you can more easily deploy on-prem. I always tell them, 100% you are correct, but that's not differential to your business. So then I try to drill down and understand why unique to the business that you're building are you going down this open source route? I'll give some examples that are not GC portfolio companies, so this is not a plug, I just think it's really smart. I don't know if anyone in the room is familiar with Prime Intellect at all. At a very high level, which will not do them justice, they're a GPU marketplace. And so like every good marketplace, what you try to do, you try to improve the liquidity of the marketplace, i.e. the kind of fungibility of the GPU. And so for the longest period of time, doing any sort of distributed training, you could never really do it on the pre-training side because it's not really a distributed problem. And so what do? They release an open source, a framework, Prime the Loco, if I'm remembering it correctly, that actually enables people to start doing this distributed pre-training. Why that's very smart is then they get to actually sell their spot instances of the GPUs, not just for the post-training, but also for pre-training, and all of a sudden liquidity improves. So, yeah.
Thank you. Matt?
A couple of thoughts. I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but typically the thing that I think matters is like what is the right way to build the business? And as you say, when someone comes and gives you that answer, like it should make sense that is the winning model. So I always think regulated use cases are a really good example where actually this enables adoption in a meaningful way, which is, okay, I need to self-host. I cannot have risk of being stuck on your platform and you taking this code away from me, and therefore open source is often a fantastic answer there. And it's also a great answer because actually those people are willing to pay for all the enterprise features because they need them. They need outcomes, they need support, they need compliance, they need ISO, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore it works really well. And I think that's kind of a perfect use case that then you should apply to other things where the question is like, is this the right tool for the job? Is this the right answer? Is this the best way to win? And one of the things I love about open source businesses is actually, with most businesses, when you talk to them, you're trying to figure out what the differentiation is. And you're spending a lot of time doing that. Whereas with a good open source business, like the open source is the differentiation. It is the reason that they will win in that market. And therefore it comes down to, okay, these are the right people to build this tool and, for example, to build this community and enable trust and et cetera, et cetera.
I'll add, you made me think of it. This is me putting my financier hat on, so excuse me for a second. But the crazy thing about open source as well is you can find what are effectively Series B metrics at times in a seed stage company. So last mention of Nick's on this, but again, it's been around for 20 years. It's the 6th most contributed open source project ever. Seed stage companies, determinate systems, flocks, et cetera, only got backed 4 years ago. And so there's not really a question of PMF. Of course, you still have to build a business model around the underlying product, the underlying open source. But from a PMF perspective, there's that. Look at the likes of Kafka with Confluent. You had Kafka around for 3 years, then Confluent comes around. I think Cadence was built in Uber. That became Temporal. Elasticsearch became Elastic 2 years later. Just seems like this crazy arbitrage. And again, I'll take hat off now. But.
It's incredible to see the level of community that is created around open source across everything that open source does. But obviously, with open source, some of the code is free, and you have to look at the ROI. So what are the signals on community traction that you're looking at, and then in thinking of how you make it a very clear ROI business when things are built on open source?
I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to surprise anyone here, but it's like real engagement. So who's engaging and how engaged are they, as opposed to an extremely loud Discord server. The things that I would look for, and it kind of goes back to your point of seeing kind of really quite mature engagement metrics, are who's actually extracting value, like getting real value from this, and to an extent that they're willing to then spend time. So how much, extracting value and spending time. And when you see people building and investing either as contributors directly or within their own business, building workflows and functionality on top, like that's sending you a very strong message that this is something real, this matters and is worth pursuing.
Agreed.
I think it also depends on the nature of the open source product. So sometimes stars actually are a good signal of kind of top-line interest or number of contributors. If you think of, I don't know, I was about to say flocks again, I won't do that. Airbyte.
It's okay, you can be proud of your investments.
Airbyte, as a good example. How do you compete with any sort of other connector as a service company? Well, one way is you just have more connectors than the alternatives. One way to do that is through having a ton of contributors who are all contributing the connectors that they care about to your underlying product. And so I think for every open source business, you have to look at the various open source metrics that you're aware of and then think about how they uniquely benefit the nature of the underlying business, which is, again, I think the point you came back to as well.
Thank you. I'm going to be rapid because we have like 2.5 minutes left. But first of all, I'm super excited to see Richie Mini there, and like the open source is coming in robotics as well. But so I'm very excited about everything on that side. What is your optimistic take, and what are you most excited about? What's coming up with open source? They're so polite to each other.
Good question. I think actually a couple of things, and nothing hugely novel, but that's kind of the point, which is I feel we're now at a point where this isn't a crazy decision, this isn't an oddity, this isn't a surprise. There are enough proven models that we can see actually this is, so I'm just excited to see the continued evolution of this model. And then secondly, one of the interesting things about AI is I think in some ways it further justifies and supports how this model should continue to evolve. You know, there was a period where people would question almost selling out, etc. But now when you think about the features that you're laying on top, like inference and various other things like have costs associated with them, it's very clear that people can't be expected to offer those as part of a full service. And I think it makes it easier to start drawing lines around, okay, these are things that absolutely we can expect you to keep open. These are things that we should absolutely expect to pay for in the long run. So nothing novel, but more the fact that we're just at a point where this is a great way, it's recognized as a great way to build businesses. I think it will continue to be a great way to build businesses, and there are a number of models where this is the best business will emerge with open source because that's the winning model.
Thank you.
I won't add too much. I just think when you go on to Hugging Face, and you see that there's like, I don't know, 2 million models there, many of which have been fine-tuned. Just because you write Zig, that's why, thank you. The amount of models that you see that have been distilled for very specific use cases, fine-tuned for very specific use cases, I just think it's super exciting.
Well, actually, I should add one last thing, which is open source is doing an incredible job at keeping the proprietary model companies honest, right? We would live in a very different world if it wasn't for open source. If we just had 2 or 3 models emerging who had the only access to this technology, we would pay significantly more. The models would evolve in completely different ways. Actually, it acts as like a real force for good, I think, on one of the most important innovations of our time.
I have to say, when we launched GPT OSS, which Wolfie was talking about earlier, we did a listening tour with developers, with Sam and our teams. Thomas and I were also part of that. And it is something that we built with the community. So thank you, Hugging Face, both for having us here today and for working so hardly on the community of open source. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Feel free to hang out. There's some drinks. There's some demo. You heard Richie Mini was beeping, quicking, or I don't know how you say this sound, but all along, you can take a look. You can see how it is. And it was great to have you all. Thanks.